Put cheesecloth across them? Put cheesecloth across them?
Vacation with us and we went down
No,
that
there's
way.
this gel
And she took pictures.
that makes it look like it's an oil painting. When you get done with it, it hardens and it's clear, but it brings the color out of the painting, and you feel it, and it looks like an actor.
Yeah.
If you do it right, it can look like a real painting.
It's a big old Western posters. Levi Strauss. Cowboys in a tug of rope thing. And so I took that and I stretched cheesecloth across it, and then I lacquered it.
You can do that.
You're not looking real good.
Yeah, when they used to framing for Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Hello, how are you?
She did about 2 seconds.
I'll be $20 for my time. Okay.
Hey, I said happy Stephanie Day.
You did.
First, I didn't know what you were talking about, but I remember that
Okay, the clock on the wall says it's time to begin, and we're in Genesis, the 37th chapter. We stopped at verse 18 last week, so we'll pick it up there. And we'll finish the 37th chapter tonight and get into the 38th chapter. I don't know of anybody that's sick other than Elena Kemp is home, not feeling well. Hello, Pat. Maxine has told me that it's getting to a point she can't get out at nights anymore. That her sons told her she should not be driving at night, and that's probably true. So
I shouldn't be driving at night either.
that's why you had a cab.
That's right.
Should you be driving in daylight?
I didn't say that.
Okay, Billy, you go like this lovingly.
Wait, I'm the man, so stop.
All of us, yes.
Let's go to our Heavenly Father in prayer. Gal, would you like to lead us in that prayer tonight?
Father, give you thanks for this day. The opportunity we have again to study your word. The rule of the world. Learn from other people's mistakes. They've thoughtful lives. Like the moisture we've had. Glad to get moisture. We're thankful for this opportunity to do simple things. Those that labor among us and others, that we would be working together. Mindful of those that cannot get out at night anymore, those who lost loved ones. And let us be no help. Especially bless us in our studies tonight. The things we learn are good for us. Look at them and learn from them. Continue to work with each other. So that in that great day when you gather all of yours together, you can gather all of us without the loss of life so far. In Jesus' name.
Amen. All right, in your handout, it's on page 93, and we're looking at capital letters K, L, and M. Covers verses 18 through 20, and that's what we'll look at Ron, why don't we begin with you tonight? If you read verses 18 through 20 on chapter 37 for me, please.
And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit. And we shall say, Some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dream.
All right, the first thing is, you'll notice I've had up there, name calling is often involved in envy and hatred. We talked before about Joseph here and the fact that he had had these dreams and everything. His father rebuked him. His brothers were envious of him and got to the point that they hated him. His father showed some favoritism towards him, created this coat of many colors, and so you see that they say here that they saw him afar off. And in all probabilities, the only reason they saw him afar off was because of this coat of many colors, which, if you look down in verse 23, it says, So it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. You don't know how bright these colors were, but they were probably bright enough that they could tell it was him from a distance, because probably no one else was wearing a coat like that at this time. The text literally reads, the master of dreams is what they were saying there in verse 19 when they say, Look, this dreamer is coming. Talking about the master of dreams, which is a common idiom for someone who specializes in something, obviously used in this case in a mocking tone. Whether knowingly or not, the brothers seek to follow in the cursed footsteps of Cain, the seed of the serpent, but they were so doing this in their approach and their decision making in this situation. This pit that they're talking about here in verse 20, when they say that we shall cast him into some pit, it was most likely a dried cistern. Keep in mind there were a lot of these cisterns around. These cisterns are large bottle-shaped pits. They were carved or hewn out of rock, and the purpose was for retaining water. These pits normally ranged anywhere from 6 feet deep to 20 feet deep. A dried out cistern makes an excellent dungeon, and obviously if they put him in this pit or this cistern, it'd be very difficult for him to get out himself. Let's look at a couple of verses here. Turn to Genesis, the 40th chapter, and read verse 15, Stephanie.
For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also have done nothing here that they should put me into the cistern.
Okay. And so there it's used the word cistern. Look at Jeremiah 38, verse 6, John.
Then took they Jeremiah, cast him into the dungeon of Taliah, and the son of Amalek, that he was in the court of the prison, and they let down Jeremiah with cords, and in the dungeon there was no water but fire, so Jeremiah sank in the mouth.
Okay. And all that is just another verse here talking about the cisterns that existed in those days and time. Notice the latter part of verse 20, though, where it says, we shall see what will become of his dreams. In retrospect, this comment that was made here must be considered the height of irony in this story. The result of these very actions is precisely what they are trying to prevent. But as we know, this is not going to happen here. Any comments through verse 20?
Well, it shows there that exactly what you said. Will his dreams come true if he's dead?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the cynical what they're saying.
Exactly right. All right, look at verses 21 and 22 of chapter 37. And that in your handout, that would be capital letter O on page 93. Pat, you want to read verses 21 and 22 for me, please?
But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands, and bring him back to his father.
Okay, so responsibility often makes one more rational in his decision-making abilities. In the pecking order, what order was Reuben? He was the oldest, wasn't he? Yeah. So, there's maybe several reasons that we can look at Reuben here as far as why he interfered in this deal. Such as the common feelings of humanity. Maybe he had that type of feeling here. Or fraternal affection. Or it could have been the sense of responsibility to God for the murder of an innocent and excellent youth. Besides these reasons, though, which Josephus suggests, he may have either thought himself most concerned to save his brother as being the firstborn, and therefore likely to be the first in blame by his father if his brother is killed here. Or he may have hoped by thus piously and compassionately preserving the favorite son, Joseph, to recover that place in his father's affection which he had lost in his late crime. That's a possibility as well. Reuben's suggestion seems to be without any conclusion. So most likely they planned to leave him in the pit until he died, thus allowing themselves to satisfy their thirst of blood without getting their hands bloody themselves. Reuben, though, planned to return at a later time and rescue Joseph. Look at, now I didn't put it up here, but go down and look at verse 29, where it says, Then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. And this is where I'm getting this, that his intent was to come back and take him out of there. His motive may have been to find a way back into his father's good graces. Go back to chapter 35, if you will, and look at verse 22, where here it says, And it happened when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it, and now the sons of Jacob were 12. And so this was the sin that Reuben had committed, and he was possibly trying to get back in the good graces of his father. Yes, Cal?
Well, if it's all just cynicism and selfish ambition that was driving him, I don't think he would have torn his clothes.
That's true.
I think I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt here that he really concerned about the boy and really wanted to restore him to his father. And when he couldn't do it, it grieved him. Okay. So
Well, and I think you're right, but possibly part of the reason it might have grieved him is that he, in his mind, thought, well, his father was going to blame him for the loss of his favorite son, too.
But when he shows up before his father, he's got torn clothing. Why is his clothing torn? Okay. So
Yeah.
this be taken as a admission of guilt that he was some way involved in this. I think, to me, it seems to be that when he tore his clothes, because that was a deep expression of grief for those
Sure.
people, his clothes were expensive.
And I wouldn't disagree with you at all on that. Any other thoughts?
I think where I read it, but it said that in this society that the firstborn was responsible for other children. They were held responsible. I don't even know where I read it.
Well, and they did have a great responsibility.
He felt it anyway. I don't know
Yeah.
if they put it on him or if he just felt it, but that's the oldest. He felt very compelled to save his brother.
I'm sure he felt the responsibility, and that's what we see when we read there, verse 29, where he went back, and as Cal mentioned, he tore his clothes, and so he was of a great deal of anguish here that his brother was not there and everything. Yes, Cal?
You could have also seen the response Jacob had to Simeon and Levi killing the people, and figured what the response would be for them killing their own brother.
Yeah, could have. Yeah, exactly right. Any other thoughts? verses 23 and 24 then. Don't you want to read that?
So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it.
This again reinforces the idea of what I was saying, is this was a dry cistern, is what it was. In your handout, it's capital letter P at the bottom of page 93, okay? So, difficult and trying experiences can often happen at the hands of our own family members. The stripping of the coat was probably done that, if ever found, Joseph might not be discerned to be a person of distinction, and consequently no inquiry made concerning him. Their hypocrisy appears in this, that they feared man more than they feared God, and thought it was not murder if they did not shed his blood or had excuses to cover their fault. Any thoughts on 23 and 24? All right, look at 25 through 28 then. Donna, you want to read that?
And they sat down to eat a meal, and as they raised their eyes and looked, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh, on their way to bring them down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh, and his brothers listen to him." Then said some Midianite traders passed by, so they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Thus they brought Joseph into Egypt.
All right, in your handout, this would be capital letter Q on page 94, and also capital letter R. So as I have up there, it is interesting that committing lesser sins can bring us contentment. These brothers were callous to their actions by their intense hatred, and so the brothers showed no remorse whatsoever for what they had done. Their next mean thing in Joseph's presence will be with Joseph at the head table in Genesis 43, verses 32 and 34. Let's go over and read that. Billy, you want to read that, please? Genesis 43, verses 32 through 34.
Yes. So they set him a place by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. And they sat before him the firstborn, according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked in astonishment at one another. Then he took servings to them from before him, but Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him.
Okay, so as I mentioned, this was a situation where in Joseph's presence, with Joseph at the head table, okay, it is already at the word of Judah, back here in chapter 37, not Reuben in this case, it was Judah, that the brothers acted. Unlike Reuben's motive, Judah's motive is not noble at all, though he will come to be the leader in the family. Go to Genesis 44, and that's fairly long, but you want to read 18 through 34?
Sure. Then Judah approached him and said, "O Lord, my Lord, may your servant please speak a word in my Lord's ears, and do not be angry with your servant, for you are equal to Pharaoh." And my Lord asked his servant, saying, "Have you a father or a brother?" And we said to my Lord, "We have an old father and a little child of his old age. Now his brother is dead, so he alone is left of his mother, and his father loves him." Then you said to your servants, "Bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes upon him." But we said to my Lord, "The lad cannot leave his father, For if he should leave his father would die. You said to your servants, however, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall not see my face again. Thus it came about, when we went up to your servant, my father, we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, go buy us a little food. But we said, we cannot go down. If our youngest brother is with us, then we will go down, for we cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. And your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. And the one went out from me, and I said, surely he is torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. And if you take this one also from me, and harm befalls him, you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol in sorrow. Now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will come about that when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. Thus your servants will bring the gray hair of your servant our father down to Sheol in sorrow. For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I did not bring him back to you, then let me bear the blame before my father forever. He's speaking of himself too. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad, a slave to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his fathers. For how shall I go to my father if the lad is not with me, lest I see the evil that would overtake my father?
Okay, now this was Judah, as the leader, talking to Joseph about Benjamin. And so we go back to chapter 37, verses 25 through 28, and we look at Judah's comments here, and we see that Judah's thought process was not noble at all here in chapter 37, but yet he did become the leader later on. So here in 37, his actions are completely self-absorbed and without moral merit. Raiders passing by must have sparked this idea in Judah's mind. Rather than killing him and having blood on their hands, they could sell him, they could make a profit and still be rid of him. And so these individuals passing by could have planted that idea into these brothers. So as a result of whyever they made that decision, Joseph was sold to the rejected branch of the covenant family. So how noble Judah sounds as he sells Joseph into slavery for how much? 20 shekels of silver.
But he did save his life. If they had abandoned him in that cistern, what are the chances somebody would come along?
That's true. Unknowingly, he was fulfilling God's providence here. As you say, he did in fact save Joseph's life by selling him. Midianite traders, and I used the word trader a while ago, and I misspoke here. I meant traders. Okay. Midianite traders are not a contradiction with the previous verse, because Ishmaelites and Midianites come from the same ancestor, Abraham. We can go back. Let's go back and look at
Ishmael?
Do what?
Ishmael?
Yeah, Ishmael and
Midian was a child of Ishmael.
yes.
So of that branch of the Ishmaelites, yes.
Yes.
But all of them would be considered Ishmaelites.
Right. So let's go back and look at Genesis 16 and verse 15. And then we'll look at Genesis 25 and verse 2. Ron, I guess we're back up to you. You want to catch both those verses for me, please?
So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, and Hagar bore Ishmael.
And then 25 and verse 2.
This is talking about Abram's wife, Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shuhah.
Right. And so the point is that the Ishmaelites and the Midianites are ancestors of Abraham. They may have intermarried too, though. We look at Genesis 25, verses 17 and 18, Stephanie.
These were the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. And he breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people. They dwelt from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt, as you go toward Assyria. He died in the presence of all his brethren.
And later on, when we look in Judges, the 8th chapter, verses 22 through 28, we find that the Midianites are also called Ishmaelites. And of course, the Midian was the son of Ishmael. And so that's not a contradiction or anything. It's just they may have come together at some point and became known as Ishmaelites. Look at Judges 8, 22 through 28. John, you had that?
Then the men of Israel said unto Gideon, Rule over us, both thou and thy son and thy son's sons also, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. Gideon said unto them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my sons rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. Gideon said unto them, I would desire a request of you, that he would give to every man here earrings of his prey. They had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. They answered, We will willingly give them a garment and cast everything therein, every man the earrings of his prey. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides ornaments and collars and purple raiment that was on the kings of Midian, and besides the chains that were about the camel's neck. Gideon made an ephod thereof, and put it in the city, even the Ophir, and all Israel went hither, whoring after it, which thing became a snare unto Gideon and to his house. Thus the Midians subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted up their heads no more. The country was in quietness 40 years.
Okay. So that was a little long reading and everything, but if you go back to verse 24 in there, they were called Ishmaelites. And so Midian, his tribe, his people, were also known as Ishmaelites. Any comments through verse 28? Yes, John.
How long was it from when Joseph was thrown into the slavery to whenever they was there back?
That I don't know, but I will check on that.
What was the question?
His question was, how long was it from the time that Joseph was sold into slavery to the time that the his father and brothers came to Egypt to buy food? And I don't remember the exact time.
Several years.
It was several years.
Probably at least 30 years.
Yeah, but
I just found it interesting that it's, like you said, probably around 30 years, and they still call Benjamin the lad.
Well, yeah, because he was the youngest.
Yeah, but he's a 30-year-old man.
He thought he was going to be the kid.
He's older than that, too, because he was born before that.
True.
Brothers are like that. They're going to put you down in the can. I found it interesting that Joseph got to hear how the story went about what happened to him. Because he wasn't listening to his brother's plot against him. But when Judah had to tell the story, he got to put it all together.
Oh, yeah, because Judah didn't recognize him as his brother.
He did.
So, no, not at that point.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Not at that point. When he first went down there and everything, he looked at Joseph as being a leader of Egypt.
Equal Pharaoh.
Yeah. And so at this point, he didn't recognize him as his brother. And so he's telling this story. And
you mean
Well,
Joseph?
they recognized him as an Egyptian.
right.
Well, I know Judah didn't recognize Joseph, but I mean Joseph recognized Judah.
Oh, yeah.
So he got to hear his brother tell exactly the plot.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I misunderstood you.
I never even picked that out of there until I heard it read.
Yeah.
Even though I
I
read it.
gathered there was some little bit of remorse when he was telling it, too.
I'm sure.
Regret for having done it.
But yeah, Joseph knew exactly who they were. But they hadn't seen him for years. I mean, when they, remember how old was he? 17 years old when they put him in that pit. So here he is, a man may have had a beard now, certainly different clothing, and he was raised up in this environment. Well, not raised, he was already a young man, but he lived this environment for a number of years, and probably spoke that language.
Differently, yeah.
Yeah.
Because he was so young when he was.
Yeah. And so Judah didn't recognize him, but he recognized him.
Don't you think he had a nice time getting to hear the real story, what they whispered about him and plotted against him?
Well, I'm sure.
That would have been interesting.
I'm sure. The interesting, and we'll see it more as we go into it, but you see no evidence of Joseph even feeling the need or the desire to take revenge upon his brothers.
He sees God's hand in what's happened to him.
But his brothers always, even up to the end of Genesis, felt that he was going to take revenge on them. And that didn't happen.
Well, that's because that was their attitude.
Yeah. Yeah. So, look at the map here. This is where this is taking place. They went from Hebron to Dothan. There you go. Up here. This is where all this is taking place. This is the route of Joseph, the purple. And then I don't have the, I think I had it written up here. Yeah, I did. There's the route of the Ishmaelites. They came down. He was in a pit here, a cistern here, and the Ishmaelites came down. This is where he was sold to them. And they then took him to Egypt. On down that way.
King's Highway. The Royal Highway.
Yes, yes.
I've been in those cisterns up there, and down in the cisterns.
Yeah.
And usually those cisterns are part natural, part man. And what they would do is, they're a place where they accumulate water. It's gradually opened it up and made it bigger. And what they do, they come in and they wall up one area, and then they would plaster, using a volcanic type plaster. They would plaster the inside there to make it more watertight.
Yeah.
But they were hard to get down. Now, in some places, there will be steps going down in there so they could walk down and draw water. In other places, they would have to drop a rope and they would have a long pole that they could do it. But most of the time, the cisterns were going to be partial man-made, partial natural.
Yeah. This one.
You see them out in the west, too, in New Mexico.
Uh-huh.
Around where the old settlements there, you'll find places that naturally accumulated water where they have done the same thing and plastered them up on the inside.
This is what we was talking about way back there earlier when we were talking about Rachel. And Jacob first went and saw Rachel, and she was watering, and she drew water for the camels and everything. And the cistern that she went into probably had steps. Don't know that for a fact. It was probably one of those cisterns that was deep enough that it had steps where she went down, drew the water, came back up, and watered the camels. But like you say, there are...
Well, we went down there by south of Hebron. There's a well that they call Jacob's Well. I mean, it's still called Jacob's Well. And this is really old construction, but it's still being in use. There are still steps going down. There'll be reeds growing down, saying the water will accumulate in there. And there might even been a small spring there. And above it, the landscape has been shaped, and there are all kinds of check dams along there, so that as the water flows down, it leaves sediment, stuff like that, which nourishes the grasses that are up there.
Yeah.
But then the water that flows in there is pretty pure, so it doesn't fill up.
Back on them not knowing him, 42:23 says that he spake to him by an interpreter. So he didn't even let him know.
So that goes back, that goes back to the language barrier I was talking about. Yeah.
Didn't know he was even knowing what they said.
That's sneaky. I love it.
The plot thickens.
Yes, it does.
All right, look at verses 29 through 30. Pat, I think we're to you.
39, chapter
29, yeah, chapter 37, verses 29 through 30.
37.
Yes.
Okay. I'll get it straight in a minute. No, I didn't. Tell me.
Chapter 37,
Mm-hmm.
verses 29 and 30.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit. And and he tore his clothes. And he returned to his brothers and said, the lad is no more, and where shall I go?
All right. Now, keep in mind, Reuben did not want Joseph killed. And so the heading I have up there, the best intentions cannot always stop evil from progressing. In your handout, this is capital letter S on page 94. Okay? So, the sale of Joseph had taken place at this point while Reuben was away, and it could have either been by coincidence or because the other brothers had come to realize that he would interfere with their plans. So they made these plans and implemented them while Reuben was not there. It has been suggested that in addition to Judah making this suggestion, Simeon also played a role, a large part, in this decision process. With Reuben gone, Simeon was the next oldest brother. And Simeon had experience in cruelty. Let's go back and look at Genesis chapter 34, verses 25 and 26. Lawrence?
Now it came to pass on the third day, when they were in pain, that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came boldly upon the city and killed all the males. And they killed Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went out.
So Simeon, he was experienced with cruelty, and so he very well could have been involved in this along with Judah. And Simeon would later receive a special punishment from Joseph. Go to chapter 42. I didn't put it up there, but verse 24, Donna, and then stay with there. I'll have you read verse 22 in just a moment. Chapter 42 and verse 24.
And he turned away from them and wept. But when he returned to them and spoke to them, he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes.
Okay. So Reuben, at this point, was distraught over Joseph's apparent death, and later seems to have been left in the dark with Jacob as to what happened while he was gone. Look at verse 22 of chapter 42. Donna?
Reuben answered them, saying, Did I not tell you, do not sin against the boy, and you will not listen? Now comes the reckoning according to blood.
So there at this point, they still don't know who Joseph is. They don't know that this man they're talking with and dealing with is Joseph. But Joseph knows who they are. So already in Jacob's doghouse, for sleeping with Bilhah, Reuben has now let the favorite son be killed under his watch, at least in his mind. Okay. Their lack of surprise must have at once informed him that they were responsible for his disappearance. Any comments through verse 30? Yes, John.
Anyhow, on 34? On 34?
Yeah, what about it?
He had two other brothers.
Yeah.
But they didn't take part in all this.
Apparently not, no.
Reuben and Judah.
Yeah.
The two that mentioned here.
Yeah.
Didn't that come in later?
One that tried to save him and the one that thought about selling him.
Right.
And I think maybe
Instead
there,
of killing him.
Yeah.
that would be his idea. We won't kill him. Okay.
But still, I think because they've seen how Israel or Jacob dealt with the two that did the killing, they didn't want to kill him.
Yeah. Well, that very well could be the case because they certainly knew about it if they didn't observe it. Yeah. All right. Good point. All right. Let's look at verses 31 and 32. Billy, you want to read that for me, please?
So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?
Yeah, that was pretty stupid, wasn't it? I mean, we're talking about a colored tunic, and they're asking, do you know whether this is your son's tunic?
And they've probably seen it for a couple of years already.
Probably. In your handout, if you're using your handout, this is actually capital letter T on page 94. The thought here is is when you think about evil deeds, they're often covered up through the deception of others. And the irony runs deep here. Jacob deceived his father with a slaughtered goat and Esau's clothing. So here his sons use a slaughtered goat and Joseph's robe to deceive Jacob. And I did put Genesis 27, verse 9 and 15 up there, but we'll not go and read that just because of the fact that that's talking about. You have it there, Cal, go ahead.
What goes around comes around. No, I don't have it. It's just what goes around comes around.
And that was going to be my point. So why read it? Because this is a situation where Jacob deceived Esau by in almost the same fashion here. He used the goat and he used the hair of the goat to deceive his father in this situation. So they created evidence to support their alibi. And their alibi, going back to verse 20, says, "Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit. And we shall say, some wild beast has devoured him." So that's what they're doing, is they're creating the evidence here to support that alibi, making Jacob believe that Joseph was indeed dead, when in fact they had sold him. So in so doing then, they would double their revenge, having already taken revenge on Joseph for being the favorite son and the dreamer. They now extend their revenge to Jacob for favoring him and his mother. Having created an escape, they did not complete the plan themselves. Rather, they sent it with a message. "We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" You see, it wasn't the brothers that brought that tunic to Jacob. They sent it, had it sent to him.
I didn't see that. I mean, I didn't catch that.
Well, probably not all the brothers went.
Says that they brought it to their father.
Yes.
Some
The
took it.
they was not sent, the they was them.
Yeah, well, that's true, but somewhere I got the idea that they had sent it. I might be wrong
Well,
on that.
32 says, "And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father, and said."
Right.
So it does say they sent it, but then also in the same verse says they brought it.
Right.
And that they said to their father, is it his or not?
But the reason I got that it was somebody else is, it's two theys, but it's referring to the ones that they
Well, it could have
sent.
been the 4 or 5 of the boys brought
Could have
it,
been.
2 of them or 1 of them, or,
Could have been.
that's the sent, but it's still a they because one of the brothers was the one that does it.
Yeah, it could have been. The only thing that would make it strange is for them to ask that question, "Is this your son's tunic?" Because they already knew it was their son, their brother's
They
tunic.
didn't want to admit it. It makes them feel less guilty if they're asking if it
That
was.
could be. That could be, yeah.
Maybe they tore it up quite a bit, so it really
And it
wasn't
was
bad.
dirty, they couldn't see.
Well, that could be too. The wild beast destroyed it so much. Yeah, that could
Oklahoma
be.
mud was on it.
All right, so let's look at verses 33 and 34.
Hunter.
Yeah, Cal, go ahead.
Then he examined it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." So Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son in days.
All right, so false information then can produce false beliefs. With no prompting other than planted evidence, Jacob reaches the desired conclusion that the brothers wanted, that his sons wanted. Not only does he at once draw the intended false conclusion, but he uses the very words of their original plan. The sackcloth was a course of mournful habit. This is the first example of that kind, but afterwards was in common use upon these occasions. We're not going to go and look at these scriptures, but these are scriptures where when people were in mourning at that time, they put on sackcloth. Now the sackcloth, the best way of describing it would be like, if you're familiar with the old 100-pound gunny sacks, burlap. They're very rough, and scratchy, itchy, and everything, but this is what they put on when they were in mourning. And
As if they weren't miserable enough, they would do that too. Irritate their skin.
Well, sometimes you have to have something to help you be miserable, I guess.
Sometimes they sit in ashes, they put ashes over their head.
Yes, ashes on your head.
Very strange.
But, any other comments on
What's
verse?
the purpose of the ashes?
Fine.
Just,
They tear their clothing, they do different things.
yeah, just another way of
Well,
mourning.
your clothing shows that somebody else gets your mourning. So why would you sit in ashes?
Same thing, wearing something scratching you to death.
I don't know.
Especially with burlap on, which you catch fire real quick if there's one of them ashes.
Certainly Job, we remember Job said in ashes, but Job had boils all over his body and said
He
in
said
ashes
that for the
for the medicinal
Medicinal
aspects
purposes.
of it.
Dirt on yours.
All right, look at verse 35. This is the last verse of this chapter. I'll go ahead and read it. Verse 35 says, "And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, and he said, For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard." So Jacob was the third innocent victim here. He refused to be comforted. Some hurts hardly ever heal when you think about it. He had only one daughter, Dinah, but his sons' wives may be here included. But what hypocrisy in his sons to attempt to comfort him concerning the death of a son who they knew was alive. And what cruelty to put their aged father to such torture when, properly speaking, there was no ground for it. The Hebrew term Sheol can mean either the grave or the realm of the dead, depending on the context. And here, when he says, "I shall go down to my grave," probably means that it not simply referring to the grave, as Jacob expects to go down to Joseph in Sheol. And Joseph he imagined to be devoured or at best unburied. Sheol in this case must therefore mean simply death. Okay? So Jacob's words about being with his son in Sheol that thus seem to indicate the patriarch's belief in a conscious reunion someday with Joseph. All right? So,
And he was still grieving even when they went down to Egypt.
yeah.
So
Now finally,
somebody goes, eat at him forever.
I'll just mention in closing of this, Potiphar seems to have been, according to our translation, captain of the guard and to have superintended the execution of criminals. Okay, this is who Potiphar probably was. That concludes chapter 37. We'll start with 38 next week. Appreciate you.